All right, so let's do some introductions. Let's start. I'm going to go in the order of people on my screen. So I'm going to start with Jack. Jack, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jack. I don't. I run GM for Monte Cook at Gen Con. You can watch me role play every other Sunday for Raven's Nest Game and the Vert System, which is another Cypher System offshoot. And then other than that, I write code and design websites for a living. So I'm just, every single ounce of me drips nerd.
Well, we asked Jack to be on here because, as he pointed out, he has run some of our official games at Gen Cons in person in the past and received very, very high marks from his players at the table. So that was one of the reasons we reached out to Jack and asked him to be on this panel. Okay, so that's Jack. We also have Jess. Jess, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, hello. I miss everyone here, and I'm glad to be here. I'm Jess. I go by Burst of Hope on Twitter, and I use they, them pronouns. I started on this wily ride by running games for Monte Cook at Gen Con, lo and behold, and I haven't stopped since.
Excellent. Thanks, Jess. And then we have Alpha Dean Lewis, who is muted.
Yes, me, Alpha Dean, you know, he, him, whatever you like to call me. I'm 1/3 of the Cypher Unlimited crew. I'm also a designer. I, design game supplements, games themselves. I've been playing RPGs for over 40 years. Love the Cypher system with a passion. I love telling great stories. I love indoctrinating people into the hobby. I love what Monte Cook has done. They've reignited my passion, and Gen Con has just been a place that I've met some absolutely phenomenal people. The Monte Cook crew, Jess, Jack. We've got stuff coming, and you know what? Join Cypher Unlimited and learn to have some fun.
Yes. Okay, I'm Charles Ryan. I am the COO at Monte Cook Games. I'm a partner. I'm also the marketing manager. I've been in gaming since the blue box of D&D in 1979 and started GMing pretty much immediately. Haven't GM'd anything, I don't think. Is that true, Bob? Certainly haven't GM'd much that isn't Cypher System since Numenera came out in 2013. And the reason for that is, and part of what brought me into Monte Cook Games, is just what a great game it is to run. It is such a fantastic system that is optimized to be easy on the GM and to get great role-playing game results out of your game. So anyway, that's it. That's our introductions. Again, if you haven't done your tickets, please do that. Let's move on into the meat of this conversation. I'm going to start with where GMs usually start, which is prepping for your game. And the Cypher system is not an awful lot like, or it has many key differences from other games that are out there, including games that people often come into RPGs via that can be more complicated. Dean, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on what make those differences.
Major differences with this is that the GM isn't held to the same stringence as the players. The GM is set free when it comes to the rules of Cypher System to create as they feel they need to create. You don't have to worry about character creation, the tropes of character creation, maxing, min-maxing, and optimization to get across an interesting and compelling NPC. And also, as far as your world's concerned, you can do a big framework and let your players fill it in. So you give them a lot of player agency. You give them a lot of control and say so. So to me, it builds a much better experience.
Yeah, I think everything you say is absolutely true there, Dean. And I think that one of the great things about the Cypher system is that it's so easy mechanically on the GM that you can really focus on ideas and concepts, and you don't have to spend a lot of time putting mechanical flesh on that on those bones. Encounters, I think, tend to move really quickly. My experience is you probably need, if you're going to play a 4-hour game session, you probably need more encounters than you would need in many other games in order to use that entire 4-hour session, which is great because you're focused on stories. I'd love to hear from you guys some of your tips for keeping things moving. Jack, do you have any thoughts on how to be ready to keep that pace going throughout the game?
I mean, like we mentioned, Cypher is so mechanically light. You can create crunch if you want to. I don't know why you would, because that goes against, I think, the heart of what Cypher is about. So keeping games moving, like one thing, make sure of is that you resolve things quickly. Don't, in other systems, you might make a challenge multiple steps. There's no point in that in Cypher. You make it a role. You let people control how well they do at that role. You let them have assets, but one role should resolve everything. And once it does, as a GM, your job is just to keep that flow of information going.
Mm-hmm.
They resolve it. You need to give them the next thing. You always need to be setting up the player for the next bit. And in your brain, you kind of have to have the next challenge in front of you, because you're only going to have seconds. You're not going to be able to spend 15 minutes getting them to climb a wall. They're going to climb that wall. You got to know what's on the other side.
Right.
One of the things I love to do is when you need a break to keep things flowing, when when you resolve an action, don't tell them what happens, ask them what happens. Again, this is something that Dean brought up. Cypher is less about the DM than it is the player. You can throw it back to them. It's like, okay, you climbed the wall. Tell me what you think you see. Tell me how, like, you can give yourself these moments where the players are in control. And it's fine. Like, you're not expected to have a complete and authoritative world in your head. You can let the players kind of fill it in themselves and just agree with it and move on. It's that yes and philosophy of storytelling, which works so well in Cypher.
Right. So there can be a lot of prep work for a Cypher session, but it's principally about concepts and cues, I think, rather than crunching through stat blocks and stuff.
I focus on, when I'm prepping, I actually don't prep. I do try to prep encounters because they're so rough in some of the Cypher games. They take a lot out of the players. They can be very dangerous. But I do far less prep with Cypher. I focus on, I think of 3 beats that I want the players to hit, and that's it. 15 minutes, these are my 3 beats, and how the players are going to get there or maybe not get there doesn't matter. I'm not doing maps. I'm not creating long story flows. Railroading is very difficult. So it's very lightweight on us. We can just kind of show up, or at least I just show up. I don't know. The other GMs here might be much better at their job than me. It's just how I do it.
Well, Jess, when you are prepping for a game as a GM, getting ready to run a game, what is the most important thing to prepare? And spoiler alert, I know the correct answer to this. So,
okay. GM intrusions.
Yeah, bing!
Bingo bongo. So the thing about, I want to step in a little bit. The thing about Cypher System, in the past couple of years, I've run the full gamut. I feel fully experienced in many mechanics, and I've gone and experienced games that are significantly more role-play story-driven with no mechanics to drive it. So you're reliant on the players at the table to understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
And Cypher System is that perfect middle of the road where you have a toolkit that is well-equipped for every single table. I will argue this till the day I die. Cypher System can work if you understand your people. So It's beautiful. I'm a more analytical person, so I will not feel comfortable in my improv state unless I prep just enough. If I get an outline going or if I read the pre-written adventures given to me, then I'm okay. But it's a good system whether you like to prep a lot or you like to prep a little or you prep none at all. You can work with the tools given to you. And GM intrusions, you can grab a deck of cards that conveniently have GM intrusions on them. You can make your own depending on the setting. It's chef's kiss.
Yeah. The intrusions, to my mind, are an awful lot like snappy comebacks. You think of the perfect one about 5 minutes after you need it. So you're going to need them when they roll those ones. You're also going to need it yourself when you want to sort of throw something into that game. So for me, that's a really important thing to have, to at least jot down a few ideas for it. Before I continue in through this section of it, I do want to have questions for any of the panelists. Feel free to post them in the Q&A. Just click on the Q&A tab, type your question in there. If it's for a specific person, you can indicate that. And when we get to the end of this section, we'll take a few of those questions.
I just wanted to jump in on what Jess was saying about GM intrusions. Something else about GM intrusions that I think many people don't realize, GM intrusions actually make you a better GM. They literally, because what it does is it pushes the envelope in what you what you want the experience to be, because you realize GM intrusions don't have to be negative.
Right.
They're just elements to flip the story, drive the story, move the story, you know. And that's, I think, speaks to also the importance where you were talking about pacing and prepping. Those things are you know, all those little nuances. Those are what I tell people all the time. My definition or description of Cypher System is that it's simplistic in execution and elegant in implementation. You know, and it's the essence of elegance. I love it.
Yeah.
Every single person I have talked to whose only experience is something like classic fantasy or D&D, and we talk about Cypher System, and I'm like, okay, your dungeon master runs the show. Everyone has eyes on you to control the narrative and tell me how this is going on. What the GM intrusion does is mechanically trains the GM to say, when I have narrative control, I am mechanically rewarding you with XP. Good or bad, we can just swift. Like if they're going off the rails and we need to bring it back in, GM intrusion, do you take it?
And they always say,
yes.
Yeah, that's so true. Like so often when I'm GMing other systems, and as a GM, you have to kind of get things back. You feel fake doing it. Like you can tell that what you're doing is contrived and weird. And the GM intrusion, it's like, look, I'm going to do something that doesn't make sense at this moment, but shut up, here's XP.
Yeah.
And everyone kind of accepts your new reality. And I find it so funny.
And it creates a different social compact with the players as well. Like, you know, I can remember instances in my gaming past where, you know, maybe the players had stopped for the camp in this story, and I'm like, okay, well, this encounter occurs, but you're getting water at the creek and you left your weapon over there. So what are you going to do? And the players, their reaction to that is, what? No way, I would never leave. You know, like that is an adversarial action on the part of the GM. I slip them to XP and say, oh, you were just getting water and your weapons are 20 feet away. Then the players are like, aha, right? They're invested in that, not as an adversarial situation, but as a collaboration on making an interesting result happen.
Right.
Thinking about those GM intrusions and having some of those things queued up, I think is for me a super important aspect of it.
Well, that's one thing I think interesting is you mentioned everyone prepping GM intrusions. I approach GM intrusions the opposite way. I never prep a single intrusion at all because I want to stay in the moment reacting to the story. So I don't want to I'm not going to a deck to look at what's going to happen next. I'm trying to think, okay, how do I get the players where they need to be next based on their decisions? I want it to feel really organic in that moment. Or in the case of something bad, how do I need to, like, what has been easy for the player so far? What has been, like, how do I need to challenge them now? Because so much of being a Cypher GM is really keeping things interesting, adding that drama. And so when I go to a deck, I always feel like it's a little more artificial, where it's like, okay, this would work. This is a dramatic beat, and I can just invent it on the spot and drop it down.
I admire your skill there, because I think, like Jess, I don't have quite as much confidence even after 40 years of GMing to know that I'm going to come up with something that's as clever as it could be. So I like to at least have some ideas put down.
And see, I'm kind of like Jack. I'll go from both schools. I'll have some stuff, but I really like what Jack says, because like I tell this story all the time. My favorite GM intrusion that I've ever done was with a group of guys. We were playing fantasy, and we had the one guy running around. I'm the greatest swordsman there is. He's, you know, tearing everything up all through like 3 sessions, and he finally rolled that one. And it was like, you know, you never see the hero really throw his sword across a room. His sword doesn't break. He doesn't drop it. He doesn't hit his buddy. So what did I do? They're fighting guards. It was just a typical guard. He takes a swing, and the guard catches the blade of his sword, goes, "You're not as good as you think you are." You know, so for the next 2 rounds, you're hindered against this guy. But then what ended up happening, this became an NPC in my game that plagued the party, you know, and especially that particular character. I didn't even plan for that. I didn't even plan for it, but it was like probably one of the best GM intrusion ever.
Like,
you know,
nice.
Charles, like, have more confidence in yourself. I mean, you absolutely would be able to come up with stuff on the spot. You absolutely
sure.
would be able to.
Yeah, you too, Jess.
And I'm not saying that I don't. All I'm saying is having a couple ideas, it's queued up, just help me. It's kind of like like having a list of names for your NPCs, so they don't end up all being named Bob, right? It's useful to have something you can refer to. The other thing that also like to focus on in prep. I'm trying to move things along a little bit so we get some questions in before having to move on because we only have an hour.
Okay.
Is focusing on making things interesting. So like stats are pretty unimportant in Cypher, or can be dealt with on the fly if you have to, or can be tacked onto a creature or an encounter, 5 minutes before gameplay. But the ideas, that frees up your brain space to work on ideas. Vivid NPCs, interesting creatures, locations, encounters, twists to your story, which sometimes are GM intrusions, and so on and so forth. So I think we're, as reminding our viewers that jumping into that aspect of your adventure and making, leading with that, if you've got game night is 2 hours away, spend your first hour and 45 minutes doing that, because you can easily use that last 5-10 minutes to put some stats on things if you feel like you need them, and then the last 5 minutes to go get the guacamole ready.
Exactly.
And
so
I'm going to let you move on.
Okay, let's talk a little bit real quick before we sort of wrap up the prep session and talk about something that's very relevant to gaming today, which is online gaming, and in particularly online platforms. What works well. Jess, do you have some thoughts on your preferred platforms for online gaming?
Ooh, Lord, honey child, do I have opinions? Okay, so really it boils down to, what is your goal? Are we just converting your table game to an online session? Then it doesn't matter. There's tech in every aspect. What the biggest factor in that is, what are your people comfortable with? Right now, Google Meet, probably the easiest setup because it's free until September for a however long session you want to run with people. And they have captions and they have chat and everything just set up. Voice, video, share your screen, do that. Roll20 we have a lot of great supplements already caked in. Your character sheets are digital. So if you want to get that feel of rolling dice or having a map on screen, Roll20 is a great way to convert that. Discord, Cypher Unlimited crew. I ran voice only Numenera games. That was the very first time I GM'd Cypher.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. That's it. It's doable. If you have a will, there is a way, and you just got to do what's most comfortable for your table.
Mm-hmm. So I would
thoughts on that.
Throw in there the relative lightness of the mechanics of the game. I think favor. Well, I'll put it this way: we in my gaming group, which includes my personal gaming group, which includes some of the MCG staff members and some other friends in this area. Once we kind of stopped meeting locally, first thing we did is pull up Roll20, and I was using its mapping capability. But in Roll20, you've got your faces down here in the bottom like this. And in the end, I kind of feel like with Cypher, so much of the stuff happens above the table, right? It's not down on a battle mat or on a character sheets. That we just switched to Zoom, right? Because just seeing people's faces and the interaction between the players was really the key point for us, more so than dice rollers online or the ability to battle map online, things like that.
Yeah, and you guys have huge, obviously, system mastery. So
right.
I will say Roll20, if you plug and chug your character sheet, that alleviates a lot of stress for people rolling, because it'll tell you when it rolls whether you succeed or fail. And they're just like, I don't have to multiply by 3 or anything.
Right. Yeah, that goes right back to what you're saying. It depends on what you're accomplishing, right? So like I was totally in the space of playing with the gaming group that I had played with for 6 years face-to-face prior to COVID-19.
Yeah.
Let's take a few questions here, and we've received a whole bunch, so I don't know that I'll be able to do all of them, but I'll
pick out the salient ones. What do we got?
Yeah, here we go. All right. So coming from a strongly D&D and AD&D background, this is coming from Leon. I worry that my wizard players might find Cypher a bit light on the abilities for magic using classes. Under the assumption that you've run fantasy games, how have you found this?
Ooh. I have an answer for that one.
Okay.
Matter of fact, Spigs and I are doing a whole series right now where we're adapting old classic D&D adventures to Cypher. We're playing in Keep on the Borderlands right now. And what people fail to realize is Cypher is flavor. It's not mechanical. It's not a bunch of lists of things. So the idea of the magic that if you look at the adept, and he has a push spell, he has an onslaught spell, it's all flavor. So those spells can be baked right in through flavors. You know, I'm playing a character who basically is going to boil down to be a sorcerer, if you will. And I'm using a focus from the strange called Will's Power with Precision. And that's how I'm flavoring all my spells, classic spells. And I'm telling you, it's a blast. It's simple, but again, my other favorite thing I talk about when I talk about Cypher System is a paradigm shift. You've got to shift your thought process from systemology, as I like to call it, and into the narrative flow. You're going to tell a story, and all of those things are just trappings. So, you know, you can literally not worry about, you know, a spell list or your powers. You just have to think about it in a different vein, and then you can have whatever you want.
I have a question here from Gabriel Whitehead. Do you prep ciphers or improv ciphers or a combination? He says he finds ciphers to be a weak spot, more so than GM intrusions.
The answer to every question here. There's a deck for that.
That's true.
I improv them, like, because again, I'm trying to react to what's happening at the table. So, or I mentioned, like, I have my 3 beats, and if I see a struggle coming forward, I want to be able to provide that cipher, like, on the spot. And it speaks to the power of the Cypher system. I never worry about giving them something overpowered. It's like, okay, this is like, I know that you're going to need something to do this. You're not picking up what I'm laying down as players. So it's ciphers, especially when you improv them, they're a way for you as the GM to give the player information in a not so subtle way. If I give you a box which opens up to answer one question, you know, you might need that later. Like it provides, like, oh, okay, he's setting down steps for me. I will use the roll table if, like, they're find like a cache of ciphers and I'm just creatively exhausted coming up with good ones. But I love to improv the ciphers, especially in Invisible Sun. I have so much fun coming up with the crazy things that system will let me do.
Not strictly Cypher System, but fair, certainly, you know,
Numenera is the same way, because it's the same idea. Like, it's just weird. Like, I get to just come up with something weird.
So I have 2 questions here that are kind of related. I'm gonna hit them both. One is from Thomas Cameron. Do you have any suggestions on how to cook statistics for opponents on the fly? And then I've a question here from Scott Coventry, which says, I'm interested in moving a homebrew world from another popular role-playing system. How difficult is doing that? I think these are 2 very closely related questions, because they're all about how do I take my idea for creatures, encounters, elements, and turn that into actionable results, you know, mechanical things. The great news is, so I'll go to the how to convert. The great news is it's super easy. I actually recently ran a game of Paranoia, you know, straight up old school alpha complex Paranoia, but in the Cypher system with my players, and it was very, very easy to do. And it goes to the question of how do you stat a monster or anything else, a creature, or anything else in Cypher system, which is, can you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? If you feel like you can decide what that is on a scale of 1 to 10, that's pretty much it there. Now you can put lots of flesh on that bone, right? You can say this creature is a level 6 creature, but it shoots a stream of acid that affects as though it's level 7 because it's particularly good with that, and it flies and it does this other thing. You can flesh all that stuff out, whether you're making it up on the fly, or whether you are prepping for it in your game, or whether you're converting it from another game. But the idea of looking at a different game and saying, well, in this game, goblins are pretty low level. I'm going to make them level 2, but I'll give them level 3 for the purposes of hiding, right? And that is a functional creature right there. Now you've got all the goblin encounters you could want right from that. And then, of course, you can build more and more if you want. But if you can assess something, how hard something is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is pretty much impossible and 1 is super, super easy, you can convert anything to Cypher. Very, very easy to do. So we still have a lot of questions. But
I have one hack for stats, I'll tell you, which is this is where I use Cypher decks. All you have to do is decide how hard the creature is, grab the Cypher deck, and pull out some random powers. Because in Cypher, you know, there's just damage and there's the creature's level. The hit points you can do however, but if you want to give it a random ability, grab a Cypher and transliterate it. That's it.
And the Cypher deck being exactly the deck that Jess was just talking about a second ago. Yeah, Yeah.
It's great in Numenera to come up with really, really random creatures that you wouldn't expect in the world. And you can do it on the fly when you need one. So it's a hack.
That is a really cool hack. I will use that.
Yep.
We are already at halfway through our time, so I want to keep things moving on. I apologize for rushing, and I apologize that there are many questions that are still open. Some of the questions, however, I think actually will be better as we move into the section on running your game, because there's I have several questions about gem intrusions and how to deploy them. So let's talk a little bit about theater mind versus battle mat. How you can use the strengths of Cypher to focus on calling up great imagery in the players' minds, making that game very compelling. Jack, I think you had some thoughts about like setting the tone when you open up.
Yeah, so the one thing I do is I like to write a 5-minute intro, but that's it. When I show up to a game, I often have very little prepared other than that 5-minute intro. If it's an ongoing campaign, it's a short summary of what happened before, and it's setting the tone for what's happening next. It is in improv, there's the idea of the opening game where you're getting influence from the audience, and that's it. I'm laying down the themes I want to hit. I'm calling up the imagery. I'm setting the tone, and then we're off and running. And for me, I used to be a writer. I like to sit at a keyboard, just give me 3 paragraphs of solid world building there, and I feel confident. Like from that point on, the players know what we're doing. They know where they're off to, and I know the mood that I'm going to be speaking to for the next 4 hours. So it's weird. But write a monologue. It also gets you better at, the more you do it, you'll get better at coming up with the types of words and phrases and combination that your game setting requires in describing things. I steal from myself all the time. Like something I wrote 2 years ago, I remember this cool phrase I came up with one night, and I'm borrowing that 2 years later because I need to explain what a mountain looks like. You know?
Right. So Cypher, we mentioned earlier when we were talking about prepping and the volume of encounters or activities you can expect your players to be engaged with. That leads to some fairly fast play. Dean, what are your thoughts on reactivity and the choices that you're offering players and so on and so forth?
Well, you know what? I try to leave that, much like Jack was talking about being flexible. The idea of giving your players choices, I present a roadmap, or not even a roadmap. I present a roller coaster ride, and it's whatever they want to go on. So yeah, I keep them on the rails, but the rails just don't go the direction you expect, and that's kind of how I keep myself together. And that's how I can continue to keep the game moving, because now your players really feel like they're in an organic world. It's just like sitting down, it's like when you go outside, you get in your car, you get ready to drive. Okay, I'm going to Wegmans, or I'm going to Walmart, down the road to Walmart. Oh, wait a minute, there's a roadblock here. I got to take a detour. But wait a minute, the detour is going to take me into a neighborhood I don't want to go to. Oh, wait a minute, this neighborhood I don't want to go to. Oh God, I'm going to see somebody I don't want to see. And that's how I look at my games. My games are organic worlds. The players are just pieces in that organic world. But more than just pieces, they're the heroes of the world. So they get the focus. And so what I have a tendency to do is that, and it keeps it moving and it keeps me fresh, because what I do is I'll focus on each player, 5-10 minutes to give everybody spotlight time, And then that way I don't become stagnant. I don't wear out my welcome with this guy and the next guy gets a turn. So
right. And I would argue the only bad decision as a GM is the decision that slows the game down. I don't want to make it sound like we're on a race or anything like that. But, if there's a rule and you're not 100% sure about it, right, spending 10 minutes to look that up or get it right is nowhere near as beneficial to your game as making a ruling. I think the same thing can be said creatively, right? You could slow things down to come up with the perfect response that the bad guy does, or that the challenge offers or whatnot, based on what the players say. But if they've taken things in a direction that's different, I think that strong choices are better than than maybe even better than good choices, right? Jess, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say when it comes to controlling a story and influencing it as a GM in the Cypher system, once you are able to make the shift in the sense that the encounters mechanically are not the bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
You put in an encounter in order to better influence the theme of your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I stat out characters, I'm looking at I'm not looking at how powerful they are. I'm looking at what are they adding to my story? Why are they encountering them?
Right.
And that's where Cypher's, the items lead to like, oh, they don't have to battle them and kill them. They could trap them or nope out of there with teleportation. So it's really important for me as a GM to think about the emotional intelligence side of like, where are we today as a table? How are we feeling as people? And then as our PCs, we can influence the story into, you know, how heavy do we want to go? Where are we hitting hard? What do we feel like doing?
Well, let me segue from that then into something else. When you talk very much about what the story is about, Numenera in particular, as a game driven by the Cypher system, has very specific ideas about where XP comes from in terms of what you do in the story and how you use to reward people. So you don't get your XP as points for killing monsters and taking their stuff. You get it for discoveries or whatnot. But of course, when you look at the entirety of the system and all the different genres you could play in, what are some of your thoughts on awarding XP?
XP, well, you know what? I think XP is a wonderful currency. I love it, and that's how I see it. I see it as currency. I don't see it as just this thing to advance your character. Character advancement to me happens organically as well. It's part of the game. So as players, you know, move forward throughout the game, they're earning XP. If you know, if I'm playing, like we played Star Wars as a comedy. Anthony, you know, ran, you know, clean up in Sector 57, and we all played the mundane workers on the Death Star the day it got blown up. Okay, so first of all, that concept right there, awesome. But we were getting currency, we were getting XP for keeping the game hilarious. The funny things that we did, you know, but they were just mundane things. They weren't meant to be funny, but in the context of what it was. So XP, I think, should be a currency that is used as long as it's going to continue the story to move. Then guess what? Give it out. It's not a problem. Let and encourage your players to use it. Let players understand that you don't have to hoard it. You know what? You don't have to worry about this consistent leveling up type idea. And if you do that, your characters are going to level up because they're going to grow. They're going to grow, and they grow as characters. You know, when you look at the story arc, I mean, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, perfect example. If you look at that, the character arc, it wasn't so much that Buffy became more powerful. Buffy became a person. She was a character in the beginning. She became a person by the end. She had heart and life, and that's the advancement in Cypher. So when you embrace it.
So what is the rate at which you give XP, and what are some of the things you would typically use to trigger the awarding of XP, other than GM intrusions, which I'm going to come to in just a second? Jack.
So two things. I give XP when I'm impressed. I don't know how else to say that, but what I want is the interaction I want with my players is not an expectation of reward for doing basic things like finishing a quest isn't like, I don't like giving you XP for that because whatever, you got to finish quests. I like when the players challenge me, challenge the world, or do something either funny or interesting, or take a minute and come up with something creative. I want the players to always be thinking, what can I say in this moment that means Jack will reward me? And that's a fucked up thing to say. Messed up thing to say. So, but I do not worry about handing it out.
We're going to talk in a minute about what we want, how to set players' expectations and what players should know about the Cypher system. So let's come back to that when we do that. So I have a question here from Matt. And that question is, you know, basically asking, it's got players who, it sounds like they're a bit conservative with using them for player intrusions or rerolls, and basically says that the XP have become kind of meaningless as players. They don't really respond to it. What are your thoughts on that?
You said XP becomes meaningless because they're spending it as like leveling?
I
just have it?
Yeah, it's become with 2 GMIs per session. That's a lot of XP to award. It's become meaningless to my players. They don't like refusing the GM intrusions and don't have many opportunities to do player intrusions and are afraid of upgrading their characters too quickly. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so one, great on the GM intrusions. Can do less, can do more. If you feel like this is too much XP, then we kind of got to take a step back and think about, is everyone injecting narrative that is affecting the story without where they should have been? Like you say that there aren't player intrusion opportunities. There probably are. They just aren't spending the XP because there's always an opportunity for it. For me, I come from a slightly different background in terms of Cypher System, where most of my games are streamed, and we take the optional route for XP. So we don't do any XP for leveling. Leveling is on a narrative base. So every other episode we level up an advancement, right? So the XP, just like Dean said, is a narrative currency. It's a push and a pull.
Yeah, and I would note that that the gentleman did not, he didn't talk about whether his players use it for re-rolls. And so I think that might say something about task difficulties. Jack, I think you were saying something about your thoughts on task difficulties when you set up tasks as a GM.
Yeah, I basically have two types of tasks. I have easy and impossible. And there's a reason for that. Is there's some stuff that is like I as the GM want you to succeed because that's going to move the story forward. And you mentioned, Charles, keep the story moving. I don't want you to get stopped because you can't unlock a door. That's lame. Get through the door. There's something. I put something on the side of that door. I want you to see it. I spent hours thinking of it. Just unlock the goddamn door. But then there's also stuff that either I don't want you to do or stuff that's really hard, and I want it to be impossible. I set like my task difficulties often not in con games, but like I will set them like they start at 20 and you like 21 and you got to bring them down because I want two things. One,
where you mean setting a difficulty of like 7?
Yes, definitely a 7. Sorry, I think in dice because I'm broken as a person. But yeah, like it starts there, and then like because one, I know my players, I know what assets they have, so I know they can bring down, and two, I want them to get creative about how they bring them down. And I'm going to challenge a sort of inherent assumption that people have about XP and your players and that guy's players have. I don't want to level too quickly. I don't want to get too powerful. This is a mentality I hate because when the players are powerful, I get to tell more powerful stories. The more tools the players have, the more creative and interesting I get to be.
Right.
If they're gods, I can be an even bigger god. Like it's a back and forth. So I encourage people and anyone that plays with me, I encourage you not to worry about overpowering. I encourage tasks to have a high difficulty, and I want to make sure you have the tools to succeed. And I want you to think about your character and the assets you have to succeed.
Right. So if you say task difficulty is level 3, then a player's liable to just say, well, I can probably roll a 9. But if you say task difficulty is 7, you'll be like, well, what asset how can I think creatively about solving that problem? And then, of course, it runs back to the XP because the other thing you use XP for is rerolls, right? So if players really desperately want to do it, that's by providing those challenges where they're heavily invested in success and they have to invest in resources, they're also going to say, well, I've just blown this ability and this cipher and I've brought this asset to bear and I can only do this once. That's worth a reroll. Let me spend my XP as well.
Well, here's the thing, Charles. I'll say this. If you people out there, you really want to experience, hit me up on Cypher Unlimited. I will put you in a superhero game or a Gods of the Fall game, and I will show you just how important rerolling is and just how to spend your XP. I love superheroes. That's my jam, and that's what I try to tell people. Just switch your thought process a little bit. It's even with ciphers. Before we came up with subtle ciphers, I was using subtle ciphers because superheroes doesn't lend itself to that. It doesn't lend itself to giving out a physical idea. Right. So the thought process was, I came up with intestinal fortitude and second wind and the grit. That's where you dig down that last ditch effort. And I would think about things like, movies like Die Hard, when you watch John McClane and he's fighting Hans, not Hans, the big guy, the big blonde guy, and the guy's beating him up, and the next thing he's like, you know what, I'm going to eat you. And I'm going to, those moments, how I thought about ciphers, to switch it around, to make you want to use your XP, to make you want to spin those ciphers, to make you want to re-roll, because you're digging down, you're digging deep.
Cool. I have a question here from Kathy. What is the best format for recording what happens in a campaign? I know that some use RealmWorks. What are other great methods, digital or not? I'm going to be the first person to step in there. I will say that in our, this is not Cypher per se, but in our Invisible Sun campaign that we play locally, we have a Slack channel, and our GM rewards us for each as players going in and writing up what happened in our last session. You get a little acumen for that, and that's nice. That's something that also distributes the work. I also, not to do a shameless plug, but this is the GM notebook that MCG makes, and this is, I was talking about that Paranoia campaign that I ran, or adventure, and this is my actual campaign notes here about that that I use in this notebook. I don't want to be too self-serving in putting this thing that we make, but as a GM, this is gold. Yeah. It's great. It's really helped all of my.
As an avid bullet journalist, can confirm the spiral notebook with gridded and lines is, it's good. Absolutely. It's very adaptable. It's so nice.
Available now on the MCG shop.
So both in character and GM versions.
Yeah. My apologies, but we are now at 45 minutes through the hour. We've gone through two of our three major topics. I think we're going through it at a pretty decent pace, but we do have a lot of questions I'm not able to get to. I do want to roll us into our last section. That'll give us more time to have some questions at the end, because I think this is our shortest section. But this is things that your players should know. This is things like, so I think I had a question here. I'll just launch off with that one. Let me find it. So this is from Brian Robbins. How do you handle a group of players who won't take the reins of their characters and just keep asking them for details and what they can do out of character? How do you encourage them to take control and play more in character? So I think there's actually a two-part, I interpret this question as sort of having two segments to it, which is both engaging them in character, but also engaging them with the aspects of Cypher System that might be different from some other games, in which, which asks Cypher asks the players to be very proactive about how they think about the world and how they interact with the world, and thinking creatively about how to bring assets to bear and make tasks more doable, and so on. Let's start this one with Jess. What are your thoughts, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. The transition is hard for a lot of people. If they're used to having kind of a backseat and being along for the ride in certain systems, then having the freedom to do that kind of leaves you to decision paralysis or not sure where to go with it, right?
True.
So it's very important twofold. One, just before you even start the session, to reiterate how you want to run this game and how you want to remind them that it is a true collaborative narrative experience. And then mechanically, as a GM, you have to be on in order to help them transition, right? So the second you pop in a GM intrusion, give them XP, and the second anyone does anything remotely cool, like when Jack says, I want them to impress me, that's when I reward them. Same thing. Be enthusiastic about the times they give you anything narrative. If you're like, oh, I have this X, I'm like, cool, what does it look like? Well, it's shiny. I'm like, what up?
Go on.
Go on. So just it does feel a little awkward and tooth pulling first when the behavior is not established.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get the ball rolling, it's glorious. And I believe in you. Yeah. Each and every one of you can get that going.
Yeah. Jack, so one of the things that we actually came into MCG's technology of games through Invisible Sun, but was implemented in the most recent version of the Cypher System rulebook. And kind of like Dean, I started using it once we saw it in Invisible Sun. I started using it before we had this written up in the new book. But that is the idea of character arcs. How have you guys implemented those and used them as a way to get players to engage with their characters?
Well, no, go ahead.
I unleash the monsters. That's what I do. I let the personalities out, and I talk to them, and I make them realize that this is an interactive storytelling place. So what I do is I do that. I give personalities to the characters. I don't talk to them like, well, this guy says, I say it to them, and give the people a chance. And what that does is, especially when you pick a story arc or character arc, let's just say, somebody chose the revenge. You know what? I'll leave clues from that person that they're trying to get revenge on, or that person is taunting them. you know, but I will taunt them directly. It's not that, you know, well, here's a piece of paper and this is, no. You know, when people don't game or, you know, they're not used to it. And that's what I tell them. I said, look, we're just going to sit here and we're going to make believe. We're going to do pretend like we used to do when we were 3 years old. You know, when we were 5 years old out in the yard, you know, you were trying to quote lines from TV shows.
So what you're saying is you come at it from trying to make the experience immersive with the NPCs and the interactions and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
And character arcs are a way for player to tell to the player what is your character's motivation, because your XP, your advancement for the character is going to come out of you doing the things that move your character toward what they want to accomplish.
I think I have a different take on both of these things. So like, because they both sort of factor in, which is how do you get a player to role play more, engage more with their character? And I'll be honest, if I have a player that doesn't do that, cool. Like as a GM, I see my job solely as I sit down at a table and I make sure that everyone else here has fun. And if that means 4 people are super into their characters and want to run them and really have arcs, that's great. If I've got one player who doesn't really get the character, who's there to have fun and wants my help as a GM or the table's help to come up with ideas, that's fine too. The only thing I care about is if someone's not having a good time. If that player is struggling and they feel like they're not contributing, that's when I want to start like talking to them individually. But if they're showing up and they're cool with me just saying, yeah, try this, you can do this, or player, like, cool. Like, fun isn't the way that I define fun. It's what that person defines as fun. Does that make sense?
I think that's a very, very valid point right there. But I do think that it is possible, particularly with a game that often compared, let's say, so the last game that I was engaged with and anywhere nearly as deeply as I am with Cypher System is D20, because I was the brand manager for D&D during the 3.5 era. So I played a lot of D20, right? D20, through the characters and through that battle mat, create a lot of interesting tactical interactions in any sort of, I'm going to talk about combat, but this extends to other things as well. When you play a game that is a bit more theater of the mind, I like your thoughts about the difficulty of challenges, because what you need to do is you need to engage the players to do something more than simply say, okay, I rolled a hit, right? You want them to be thinking about where is their character in the space? What are the interesting options that they could bring to bear on this situation? And again, I'm using combat, but this really could be anything, right? How can they think creatively to frame the challenge in a way that gives them advantage, because they need that advantage. And so I do think, well, I agree that I don't think we want to disparage anybody's fun if what they just want to do is roll the D20 and see if they hit. I do think there's things that we can do to encourage them to view the world a bit more proactively, or view their role a bit more proactively.
That's fair.
Jess, what are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to follow up. I don't disagree. Like, that's 100% where I stand.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I think that as we talk about things your players should know, I think that level of engagement is probably the number one thing. And we've had some good tips on how to introduce that level of engagement. Or like we say, if you don't have to be slavish to it if your players are having fun. So let's see, go back to some of the questions and see how some of these ones fit in. I'm remembering how to do GM intrusions. Any tip to push myself to do more?
Set a timer on your phone, I guess. Like
that is an option.
Like there's all sorts of hacks when you're running a game. Like if you're not good at remembering to do it, say like every hour I got to come up with something. Like put yourself on the spot. Creativity works best under constraints. So give yourself a constraint.
And there's a phrase attributed to Raymond Chandler, I believe, that says like when your story is slowing down, just have a couple guys kick down the door with the guns, right? That's kind of what a GM intrusion is. But if your story's not slowing down, don't feel like you're obligated to just bring in GM intrusions, for the heck of it, right? This is something that you do to create interesting twists, to control the pace, to add spice to your game. If you don't feel like you're needing it, and the only time you're doing GM intrusions are when people are rolling those ones, that might be okay. That might be fine.
If you're not doing GM intrusions because you forget to do them, it means you're having fun without them, so you do not need them.
Yeah.
That is a good idea. That is a good, good piece of advice.
So Alex W asks, and I think this would be a great thing to do with our last 4 minutes here. What is the favorite intrusion you have ever come up with? And why don't we go around and everybody can bring one up?
Well, I think I told you guys mine. I mean, I've had a few, but that probably is my favorite.
Awesome.
Short catch. So, Jack.
My favorite was at a game 2 years ago at Gen Con. There was a whole family. It was like 5 guys, and one guy had brought his daughter along with them, and she was just messing with the team the whole time. She was a mischief maker. And so my favorite intrusion was her and I decided, this was in the Strange, forget what the game was, what the adventure was. The intrusion, we did it together, was teleporting the entire party to the medieval fantasy world in Strange. And when she showed up, she got to turn into a dragon. And my intrusion, it was a party intrusion, everyone got XP. I loved it because, one, the player got to have fun. She got to mess with her dad. And the end result of it was that the game was it was fun, but, there hadn't been any really big moments that we sort of hope happened. This is a big moment that, like, everyone remembered. And suddenly they were in, I don't know why the name of the recursion escapes me. What?
Arden.
Yeah, they were in Arden, and one of the characters had recursed into a dragon. Like, that's just what happened. And that was the last 30 minutes was this one player just like, I'm a dragon. Let's finish this encounter.
Awesome.
So that's my favorite.
How about you, Jess?
The beauty about GM intrusions, I handle them like story beats, right? When it kind of dies down, I just throw one in, and they're not punishments, they're innocuous. So one time, they were just walking, right? They were doing the typical, we're traveling from point A to point B. I'm like, cool, I have a GM intrusion for you. And he took it, and all I said was, as you're walking by, you end up tripping on what you thought was a tangled root, and you fall face first into a puddle. And he's like, cool, I want to spend my XP for a player intrusion. I'm like, okay, cool. What do you want to do? That puddle is a warp portal. And I was like, why not? Take it away. Let's go. Where are we going?
I love the idea that you've answered the GM intrusion question with a player intrusion, because probably we should have talked about that a little bit. We should have talked a little bit about, particularly in the player engagement part, about reminding players about player intrusions. It's a relatively new mechanic since Discovery and Destiny came out, and I think sometimes people don't always think about it.
It's a really cool conversation. It's a really cool, like, we're meeting each other, we're ramping up the parlay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Player intrusions was something else that the Cypher Unlimited crew had been using forever. We used to charge 2 XP for it, for a player intrusion. Mm-hmm. And player intrusions are absolutely brilliant. What I dig about what MCG did with them was kind of tailored them a little bit to give it flavor towards the types. So that makes sense, and it makes it doesn't give too much power to the player, but it does give them, those cool moments. It's nothing like, as a matter of fact, in the Salvage over Saturn game this weekend, the guys, they wanted to find pie on the salvage. They wanted to salvage pie. And that was a player intrusion but it was a social idea. The speaker came up with the idea that there was going to be pie. They found cases and cases of pie on the one ship. So it's stuff like that, just to add a little flavor, fun. Mm-hmm. I love it. It's got awesome stuff.
Well, I'll close out with my favorite intrusion, GM intrusion. Ironically, I said earlier that the players never turn them down, but that's not 100% true. They rarely turn them down. My favorite is the one that was turned down, and I don't even remember which one it was. But I was running a campaign. It was a science fiction campaign. It was the basis that the Adventure Castaway was spun out of. And the players had been wandering out of this alien jungle, and they'd had their first encounter with one of the other groups that was there. And it actually did a very rare thing, which we had a game session that was almost entirely one gigantic encounter as they interacted with these bad guys, including some or who they consider to be bad guys, including some pretty powerful bad guys that they're having a very hard time making good rolls against. And I don't think I've ever seen as many XP go back and forth with intrusions and player actions and whatnot as I have over the course of the couple of hours that encounter took to play out. But when it actually got to the point where the players were closing in on their objective, they're finally getting to what they wanted to make happen, and I did an intrusion to make to the benefit of the bad guy, and one of the players threw down their XP and said, no, it didn't happen. I was like, at last, I found that point where the players are going to push back in that manner, and I think that was a really memorable game night for us. And like I said, I don't remember what the intrusion was at this point. It was probably something fairly workaday within the encounter, but it was a lot of fun. So it is now the end of our hour, and I apologize. We have something close to 24 questions that we were not able to get to. The volume of questions and the number of people that came to the seminar is substantially higher than we anticipated. So for people who asked questions and did not get answers, I apologize that we were not able to get to all those questions.
Try to type some of them out for you.
Well, I was going to see if maybe Dean had some thoughts on where people could go and get answers from the community to some of their GMing conundra.
All those questions that you guys had, if you pop over to Cypher Unlimited Discord or Cypher Unlimited Facebook, we'll be more than happy to answer them. Everybody here, I think, are members of either of those groups or both of those groups. Wonderful place to get answers, wonderful place to chat, talk. We've got voice, we've got video, we've got it all. So please, everybody, come join us at Cypher Unlimited.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic community. There are thousands of members, hundreds of experienced GMs, Cypher GMs, who would be more than super friendly environment.
Yeah, we're about 3,300 players and growing. We've probably actually grown more than that over this weekend.
Awesome. Terrific. So with that, I've got to bring it to an end. Again, I apologize for people that posted questions and didn't get their questions answered directly, but we hope that you got some great tips from this and some great understandings, and really appreciate everybody coming.
Charles, thank you so much for running this thing and inviting us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, definitely. I'm very humbled to be here. And
so it was a good time.
I do not belong next to these two, so you made a mistake.
Yeah, right. Come on.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.